As we continue through the Westminster Confession of Faith, we look at the third section of the confession in the chapter titled Effectual Calling. The third section reads as follows: Elect infants dying in infancy are regenerated and saved by Christ through the Spirit, who worketh when and where and how he pleaseth. So also are all other elect persons who are incapable of being outwardly called by the ministry of the Word. One of the great comforts of the gospel of Christ is that it has a word of hope for families with young children, especially for those families that have experienced the heartbreak of the loss of a child in infancy. One of our families has suffered this recently, and others have done so as well. What happens to our children when they pass from this life? What are we to make of that? If we accept the testimony of Scripture that we are conceived in sin, and that from the very earliest moments of life we are characterized by our sin, then the question becomes, how can an infant child who is conceived in sin pass from this life and enter into glory? Many in our day, particularly in probably many evangelical churches and others as well, would suggest that all children go to heaven, and they may have an opportunity to have the gospel presented to them at that point, or in any case, because they're before an age of responsibility, while they're in a period of innocency, then they may immediately go into heaven itself. And so therefore, we need not be too concerned about their destiny. The problem with that notion, as compassionate as it attempts to be, is that it really doesn't square with what the Scriptures say with regard to our nature, our being fallen in Adam, and the consequences of that for all mankind. In our understanding of the Scriptures, we see that God does indeed save some of those who are lost even in infancy. The confession speaks of elect infants, those whom God has chosen. These are those whom God has set His love upon and is pleased to rescue and save them. Some of my friends in the Baptist churches will say that we cannot baptize infants because they're not able to make a public profession of faith. They're not mature enough to give a credible profession on their own, and so therefore any notion of baptism at least ought to be held until they are able to make such a profession of faith. Do they understand that when they say that, they, especially if they understand the doctrine of sin, that they leave the children outside the realm of God's saving grace? It's probably something that they would not admit or care to accept, but then they would hold this idea of children somehow going to heaven because they were innocent, in contrast to what the Scriptures say. We do know that God is able to work in the hearts of infant children. Think, for example, of John the Baptist in the womb of his mother Elizabeth. When Mary came with the infant Jesus, carrying Jesus, John the Baptist responded with joy in the womb. Now, how is this possible? It's certainly beyond what we could comprehend, but some of you know that there have been stories of children who have grown up to be child prodigies, and that's because the parents took time, even when they were in the womb, to play a violin for them, or read literature for them, or something like that. And somehow this child was absorbing all of this, and it was not long before that child would be excelling beyond all his peers, beyond all expectations, in some facet of the fine arts or what have you. We shouldn't limit what God is able to do within the heart of an infant child. shouldn't limit it by what our expectations are. And so the confession addresses the matter of elect infants dying in infancy are regenerated and saved by Christ. You might recall that the Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians 7 spoke of families being holy. When one member of the family, wife or husband, is a believer, then the remainder of the family is sanctified, is set apart for the Lord. Even the unbelieving partner, the spouse, may remain an unbeliever, but they have certain benefits that come to them because they have a believing partner. Similarly, the children of a believing parent are holy to the Lord. They are set apart and the objects of God's special care. For many of them, God will work in their hearts such that they come to faith in Jesus Christ for themselves. And God is not limited to an age of accountability or the maturity of their minds to be able to give verbal expression to their faith. Faith is very much evident even in seed form. A child has faith in its mother. A child rests in its parents. But a stranger, it doesn't know. I've had the circumstance on numerous occasions when a small child would come up to me and hold my leg thinking that I was their daddy. But when they took a second look at me and realized that's not my daddy, they quickly turned away and went to the true daddy. There's faith there. There's a connection there. They may not be able to express that or verbalize it, but it's there nonetheless. Similarly, in infant children, God is able to do wonderful things in the hearts of our children. God's arm is not, as it were, straightened or not hindered. He is able to save even to the uttermost. And that's true of elect infants, and then also true of those other elect persons who are incapable of being outwardly called by the ministry of the Word. This may have regard to those infants and children who are born with some sort of mental defect, or those individuals who may have an accident and become paralyzed and become a vegetable or something like that. And they may be somehow aware of what's going on around them, but they cannot speak, they cannot communicate. And we may wonder as we talk with them whether they hear and understand. Some of you may have elderly parents who may have succumbed to Alzheimer's. Are they able to respond to the gospel even at this point? They're not beyond the reach of the gospel of Christ. God is able to save in amazing ways. So do not limit what God is able to do. Preach the Word at every stage of life to whomever God brings into your life. The Word is powerful. It is saving. And is able to save the youngest infant in the womb as well as the most elderly patient in a nursing home or in a hospice. God is strong and powerful to save. And our weakness does not inhibit Him in the least. Rest in His grace and the power of His great love.